I have a lot of gardening tools that I use often. Some of them I use every single day. And it's hard to imagine some of the typical gardening tasks being done without these simple tools. I consider them essential to get some of those basic tasks accomplished. Join me today as I share with you 10 essential gardening tools. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and it was really easy putting together this list of 10 essential tools because I just looked at what I carry around the garden on a regular basis and the ones that I have sitting out ready to go at a moment's notice. These are the tools that I have and I actually use in my garden. Some of these tools I use so often that I made a mailbox storage unit so that I could store them right in the middle of my garden. The first being a set of good bypass pruners. Through most of the growing season, these are either in the mailbox ready to go or most often in my pocket. Because as my landscape flowers, I want to deadhead. So they're ready to go. I pull them out and I just snip off the blooms that are spent. And then I can use them and just drop that material onto the soil. It's hard to imagine another tool as effective as hand pruners at taking a plant like these peonies with very tough stems and cleaning up the plant and then taking that material to fall down as a mulch. This is just too thick to try to pinch off with my thumb and fingers, but the pruners make short work of it. Already this week in the vegetable garden, I used my pruners to prune back all of the scapes on these garlic plants. This is the tool I'm going to use when I harvest my pumpkins, my squash, my zucchini. It's hard to imagine a day in the garden without a good set of hand pruners. I'll put these away for a bit and pull out another set of tools that I use constantly. Trowels. Hand trowels are essential for many of the planting and sowing tasks that we do in the garden. When I'm putting in tomatoes and peppers and actual plants, I like a wide trowel so I can dig a pretty good hole to put that plant into. But when I'm seeding and I need to make some trenches or determine the depth of a hole, I like this more narrow trowel that actually has some markings on it that give me the measurements for that sowing. And of course, trowels do double duty when it comes to weeding. There are many deep-rooted weeds that if I just try to pull, might actually pop off the top. So I can get down, loosen the soil with the trowel, and the weed comes right out. I have some of those same concerns with my root vegetables. I really don't like trying to pull a carrot out of the ground and all I end up with is just the top part and the root ends up staying behind. So that's where trowels come in again. A great aid for harvesting the root vegetables. That's why they're always at my fingertips, ready to go for the garden. While the trowels might be nice for digging out a few individual weeds, when it comes to a patch of weeds, I need heavy ammunition. So that's when I turn to a hoe. Now, a classic hoe is great for chopping at the weeds and cultivating some soil, but I really love this stirrup hoe. It makes short work of an area that has a lot of plants growing in it that need to be cleared out quickly. And so for some of these pathways that I haven't mulched yet, I can get my stirrup hoe in here and clear out all these young weed seedlings before they take over. These hoes have been marketed as hula hoes, and they're also called swivel hoes. But regardless of what you choose to call them, they make short work of the weeds in areas that I want to clear out or expand my garden. And another essential tool for expanding the garden and doing a lot of that building that you have to do and preparing of the soil is a good old shovel. Now, technically, this is called a spade because it has a point to it. But here in the U.S., we tend to call anything like this a shovel. And it also is great for digging down and getting some of these deep-rooted weeds. When I have compost or manure or any other organic matter that I want to turn into the soil, the spade is the tool of choice. It digs in, it moves a lot of material, and a good heavy-duty shovel gets the job done. I use this long-handled shovel for anything that is low, my in-ground beds, and actually digging underneath any of my raised beds. I strongly encourage, when you get a good shovel, to get one with a fiberglass handle. With all of the digging, and you end up prying out rocks and all kinds of heavy material, a wood handle can break, and I've broken handles, but this fiberglass handle is almost indestructible. And I also have a shorter shovel for working in the raised beds. I don't have to lift this up and try to manhandle it. It's a little bit heavier. But when I amend my beds in the fall, this is what I use. It's much easier to get down without straining too much. Another good tool for digging in raised beds is a short-handled garden fork. Now, this isn't a pitchfork. A pitchfork has really slender tines, and it's usually made for throwing hay or straw. Now, this is a heavy-duty tool with really thick and strong metal tines. I can get in these beds in the fall very easily with this tool and them in the soil, but I can also use it for things like this garlic. When it comes time to harvest, I can take this tool, put it into the bed, pry out the garlics one row at a time, and it really makes short work of that job. It's also the ideal tool for getting into a compost pile and turning the material. The strength of the tines and the short handle also make this a tool that you really need if you are composting. Another essential tool where the tines make a difference is a good sturdy garden rake. Now, you may have a lawn rake, but there's a difference. Those have a fan of thin metal tines. This is sturdy. And I also have a fiberglass handle on this one because I use this a lot. I have a lot of mulch in my garden. So when I bring in a load of mulch, this is what I use to spread it throughout the garden. After I amend the soil and there's dirt clods and maybe a few weeds, this is the tool I finish the job with. Going in, breaking apart the dirt clods, doing a little bit of cultivation, and even ripping out some weeds. I'll also use a good garden rake like this in my raised beds because there really isn't another tool that can do that job. When you use all of these tools in the garden, it's often because of that soil amending or spreading of mulch, which means you have to have something to carry all of that material. That's where a wheelbarrow comes in. This is an essential tool. When I have straw bales to move around the garden or bags of pine needles or leaves, I could manhandle each one individually, strain, and probably hurt myself. But by loading up the wheelbarrow, I can take heavy material and move it everywhere with very little effort. Now, I suggest that you do spend a little bit extra money on a wheelbarrow because this is another one of those tools that I've had for decades. It's strong, it's durable, and it just keeps going and going. Now, you don't have to get a steel wheelbarrow like this. There are many plastic garden carts that you can use. The idea is you need something to help carry the heavier material to other areas of your garden without hurting yourself. While the tools so far are used on a regular basis and quite often in my garden, the one that I use every day is this water wand. This long shaft with the squeeze handle activation is ideal for putting water exactly where I want it to go, especially for plants like these potatoes that are in grow bags. I can put the wand in and give the plants exactly the right amount of water that I think they need. There's no bending over, there's no hard work. This is an easy way to water. The head makes for a soft, diffused spray of water that I can direct at the base of the plants. But yet it's strong enough that if I had aphids on this basil, for instance, I could spray off the basil. That's strong enough to dislodge the aphids, but not so strong that it's going to harm the plants. And I also like this wand because it has a detachable shower head. And if you're at all like me, you will end up leaving your watering utensils out when that first frost hits, and it'll freeze and it'll break. And I've had to replace a number of these. It's no big deal. The mechanism is still good. I just get some replacement heads and it's ready to go for a new season. Another tool that I always have with me in the garden, you've already seen it in a couple clips so far, it's gloves. Now you might not think of gloves as a tool, but I think they're essential, especially for pulling big weeds that have a lot of pricklies on them. I wouldn't attempt to do this barehanded, but with gloves, I can take care of this weed like it's nothing. There are often sharp and painful weeds that find their way into a garden bed. The gloves make short work of these weeds. Now, you can just look at my gloves and see how often I use them. This is a nice sturdy set of leather gloves that I've had for this season. They should last pretty well into the fall, but I expect that I'll wear these out before the end of the year. I have stinging nettle growing in this bed, and I've already made the mistake of trying to weed around this plant without gloves. That's the kind of mistake you typically only make once, because there's a reason it's called stinging nettle. It hurts, and it hurts for a long time after you touch this plant. I wouldn't even think about harvesting stinging nettle without my gloves. A tool I think you should have in your pocket or on your belt every time you go in the garden is a knife. Now, I use a utility knife, and of all of the tools I've shown you, I've owned this one the longest. It's hard to find a good, solid metal utility knife, but when you do, it will last for decades. I use this to cut the twine that I trellis my plants with. I use this to cut bags of compost and anything else that I need to open in the garden. I use this to pry out little stickers that get in my fingers if I don't use my gloves. I use this to prune some of the smaller branches of plants. And I also use this to cut off some of those melons and squashes when I harvest. I consider this to be just about my favorite tool. That's why I have it in my pocket all the time, and I've had it for so many years. Now, it's called a box cutter because it's often used for opening boxes. Well, the more I order to use in the garden, this is right at my fingertips to open those boxes as well. I just can't imagine a day in the garden without this nice handy utility knife in my pocket. These are my favorite tools. These are the ones I use most often. And if you want to see how I use some of these tools and get some other gardening ideas, watch one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.